Well, hello, hello, hello. Much love to you all. May God bless you all. Hit the like button, share this out. We are going to continue this history series, the Bible and world history, and we're going to look at sacred, secular, and redemptive history from a time frame of about 1000 to 750 BC. See, the key thing is history is a unique and fascinating field of study because it constantly draws us forward to the next great civilization or event. In school, history was the one lesson in school that I always had perfect grades in. Everything else would kind of be subpar, average. History was always something that caught my eye. And everything that happens sets the stage for the next great event or movement in history. This journey is one that is filled with kinds of ups and downs and twists and turns that offer new panoramic views of the world all around us. I mean, we get things like the advancements in China that continue to affect life and culture today, the story behind the first Olympic Games, and where we're at today with this. And I also want us to look in this from the time frame of David to Solomon. So first, let's talk about the reign of David. See, David reigned as king over Israel from 1011 BC to 971 BC. And David was an incredible man and a great leader, a man who really loved God and was chosen by him to lead his people. He was a great warrior, an inspiring leader, a very skilled musician, and a gifted composer of poetry and psalms. After David ascended to the throne, the nation of Israel and the people of the world were never the same. His life was full of humility, successes, failures, repentance, and faith. And this has challenged millions of lives worldwide for people for thousands of years as they've read the Psalms and they've seen the things he went through and they can relate to it. See, under the reign of David, the city of Jerusalem was captured by the Jebusites and became the capital of the nation. And the Bible sometimes calls Jerusalem the city of David. And we see that there was advancing far into the south and conquering Edom, the copper and iron rich Arab desert. David secured Israel's economic stability here. He had access to these natural resources that enabled David to produce weaponry that helped maintain the power of the Philistines. For instance, in 1 Chronicles 22, 1 through 3, then David said, "This is the house of the Lord God, and this is the altar of the burnt offering of Israel." And David commanded to gather together the strangers that were in the land of Israel, and he set masons to hew wrought stones to build the house of God. And David prepared iron in abundance for the nails, for the doors of the gate, and for the joinings, and the brass in abundance without weight. So we see here that he had access to this region, and it also gave David a strong base upon which to move north and secure the northern boundaries of Israel. Just to the north of Israel and Syria was the tribe of people called the Armenians. About this time, they were expanding into Mesopotamia and coming to conflict with the Assyrians that were there. And actually, let's go a couple chapters back. Let's go to chapter 18, verse 3. And David smote Hadaezer, king of Zobed, unto Hamath, as he went to establish his dominion by the river Euphrates. So this, David moved to the north. He conquered the Armenian king Hadaezer. This is the guy we are talking about here. So we see here that at this time in history, there was a combination of international political factors that brought Israel some respite from the conflict with both Egypt and Assyria, the two greatest powers in the Near East. As the nation of Israel was consolidated under King David, Egypt was preoccupied by a civil war between Upper Egypt in the south and Lower Egypt in the north. We talked about this in one of the other history lessons where there was this uproar that happened. And we see that The lower Egypt was ruled by the pharaohs of the 21st dynasty, and the upper Egypt was ruled by the high priest of Amun, who hired mercenaries from Libya, mercenaries that would support their rule. Assyria, as noted earlier, that we were talking about, they were being kept at bay by the Armenians, a wandering group of nomads that eventually settled down in the region north of Israel. Damascus was the capital city of their kingdom. So, with the major powers of the Near East, we see that David neutralized them. He was able to unify the people of Israel and conquer some of the smaller nations in the surrounding areas. David then desired to build a temple to the Lord to replace the aging portable tabernacle. Before David began to work, however, the Lord told him something. Let's go to actually 2 Samuel chapter 7, where he wants to build this. And actually, the Lord tells him in this that he's not going to build it. Instead, it's going to be built by his son, and there's going to be this rule over Israel forever that leads to the coming prophecy of the Messiah. Of course, he would descend from David, and we see this in Matthew 1:1, Romans 1:3, 2 Timothy 2:8. And through this single promise, God was clearly working in the secular history as well with the sacred history, and with the redemptive history that was taking place. So we're going to get into a brief look at China. So we're going to talk about China, and they were far to the east of Israel, but they had very important developments that were taking place that affected the history, but it didn't have a direct impact on sacred history. But during the reign of David, the Zhao dynasty had taken by force the throne from the Shang dynasty and eventually became the largest reigning dynasty in the country's history. And the greatest struggle was between a king's virtue and his wickedness. The threat to his throne came from his own nature. So China grew and developed without much contact or influence from other nations for a great many years. Rather than focus on world dominion as most countries did, like Alexander the Great and all them, China kept an eye on their inward moral development as characterized by moral virtue of the king. And if the king became corrupted and perverted, then his kingdom would be taken by force by a more virtuous king. Um, the inward focus allowed the nation to develop a more isolated political culture. So the Shang dynasty began roughly in about 1766 BC. And this dynasty was called the Yellow River Civilization because they had built around the Yellow River. And during this time, the dynasty uh, brought the Bronze Age came to life in China. Bronze had already been used before that, but it became more integrated into daily use of life. And the work of the Shang bronze craftsmen produced some of the greatest bronze work in history that no other nation was able to form such complex and sophisticated designs in bronze. Um, so by the time of the Shang dynasty, the Chinese alphabet had developed and evolved into a form and structure that they still use today. The advancement of that writing made in China under the Shang dynasty brought about a fascinating religious movement as well. Um, they also would seek divine spirits to find answers of life's questions. The ruins of the Shang capital, archaeologists had discovered hundreds of bones with Chinese characters engraved on them. These bones are now called oracle bones and were used to seek answers from the divine, sometimes even from dead family members. And they believed that these family members went to heaven and still guided them as they were on earth today. If someone had a question, they would visit a priest at the temple. He would apply heat to the dry bones or a turtle shell, and then when the surface would crack, the priest would read the crack like how someone today would read palms or tarot cards. The message from these bones and shells was believed to be divine. But the demise of the Shang dynasty began during the reign of Wu Yi, who ruled for about 77 years before the Shang dynasty fell. He was a corrupt king whose main offense to the people was that he showed disrespect to their gods. Wu Yi cast lots, something like dice or playing cards today, and If certain combinations were regarded as favorable omens turned up in his favor, he mocked the gods and called them like lousy gamblers. Such disrespect of their gods was regarded by the people as a serious moral failure and a failed responsibility of any king. So, as the oracle bone ritual became more and more integrated into Chinese life, it increased the role of the king as the head of the courts. The seeking of wisdom from the courts through the use of communication um, with the divine united the institution of the government and religion. So a king who mocked the gods became an anathema. For this reason, when Wu Yi was struck by lightning while out hunting, as stories say, many believe that it was an act of the gods punishing the king for his rebellion. He was succeeded by his son and then his grandson, both of whom, according to Chinese history, continued in the moral decline that was started by their grandfather and their dad. Wu Yi's great grandson, Chao, was the worst king of all of the descendants. He was a gifted man who was praised for his strength, intelligence, lots of skills. He had perception, but unfortunately, he used all of these skills in being a very wicked person. His life was bent upon wine, pleasure, and immoral relationships with women. He raised taxes to finance his very wicked lifestyles, and his depravity quickly turned into political tyranny. He demanded complete loyalty to himself. Anyone suspected of disloyalty to his reign was forced to lie on top of burning hot rocks. But eventually, the wicked ways of Chao and his ancestors appeared to have caught up with them, for they were attacked by the neighboring tribe, the Zhao dynasty, that eventually came the Zhao dynasty, who lived just west of the people of the Shang dynasty under the leadership of the king named Wen. Um, who was regarded as faithful to the moral ways of heaven, and his son Wu, the Zhao, were successful on overthrowing the Shang dynasty. So when Wu conquered the Shang dynasty, he did so with brute force. And this offended many in China. They saw it as a violation to the integrity of the king. Therefore, Wu had to work hard to justify his position as king. And at the start of his reign, Wu offered sacrifices to the gods um, to make up for his perceived sins that people said, and set aside all the weapons of war that he had amassed from the battle. So after Wu died, his young son had became king, and initially the country was ruled by a regent due to the youthfulness of his son, and one that was more significant to the contributions of the Chinese culture, which still exists today, which is a religious political concept called the mandate of heaven. What's really ironic is when we look at some of their symbol. So, the Chinese character for the emperor or lord Wang, as you'll see here, the symbol consisted of three horizontal lines joined by the vertical line. The character represented the connection between heaven, the top line, earth, the bottom line, and the king was the middle line. The theology behind the mandate is that heaven desires the humans be provided for in all their needs, and that the emperor is appointed by heaven to see the people's welfare. If the emperor or king have fallen into selfishness or corruption and fails to see the welfare of their people, heaven withdraws the mandate and invests it in another. The only way to know that the mandate had passed was by an attempt to overthrow the king or emperor. And if it was successful, it meant that the mandate had passed to another. If it failed, the mandate still resided with that king. So the mandate of heaven is probably the most critical social and political concept in Chinese culture. It has affected historical change and provided a profound moral theory of government based on selfless dedication of ruler to the benefit of the general population. The concept also recreates the Chinese concept of heaven, which was derived from the earlier concept of a Lord on high, or Shang-Ti, um, into a force that regulates the moral universe. This moral aspect of heaven, along with the mandate of heaven, influenced Chinese cultures and philosophy to focus on moral and social issues more than perhaps any other ancient culture in that time frame. So now let's bounce back to the history of Israel, because after King David died, Solomon became king and this new dynasty started. Lots of success for Israel came in a different way for Solomon than David. David was a passionate fighter who inspired others to follow him. Solomon, on the other hand, was a builder and very impressive with how he managed things. Under Solomon, the nation basically reorganized into 12 administrative districts. He began to rework the tax system and began to work on the temple, one of the greatest building in ancient history for Israel's timeline was this temple with stone, carved cedar, coated with gold, filled with incredible treasures. Solomon had a reputation not only for being a master builder, but also a very wealthy man. Some 12,000 horses, the scripture tells us about. But also, he was very well known for his wisdom. We also see in 1 Kings 10 that this reputation of his wisdom went beyond the borders, where the Queen of Sheba actually had came. And as she arrived, she brought with her many goods to share with Solomon. It's actually looking 1 Kings 10 through 11. And she gave the king 120 talents of gold and of spices, very great store, and precious stones. There came no more such abundance of spices as these which the Queen of Sheba gave to King Solomon. And the navy also of Hiram, that brought gold from Orpha, brought it from Orpha great plenty of almug trees and precious stones. So we see this Solomon had been involved with people across the world because they had heard of this amazing wealth he has, what he's doing in Israel. He has wisdom above anybody else that people had ever heard of. And of course, we see that we go back one chapter 9, verse 26 through 27, and King Solomon made a navy of ships in Ezron Geber, which is beside Eloth, on the shore of the Red Sea in the land of Edom. And Hiram sent in the navy his servants, shipmen that had knowledge of sea, with the servants of Solomon. So we see here that the Israelites had not experienced really like a navy. Now they had a navy. But under his reign, they were in a time of peace. They were really building up their wealth and their there was huge amounts of gold given right here. And Hiram sent to the king 60 talents of gold. Lots of gold was given to him, a large amount. Solomon also married the daughter of an Egyptian pharaoh. Verse 16, for Pharaoh, king of Egypt, had gone up and taken Gezerah and burned it with fire and slain the Canaanites that dwelt in the city, and given it for a present unto his daughter, Solomon's wife. So, through this marriage and alliance, we need to understand that this was a time of great wealth and political power for Solomon, and there was some positive advancements, but God had forbidden relationships in the law of Moses of anyone outside, because he said that it would draw their hearts away from God. And that's exactly what happened. Even though there was this political and financial stability, we see that here in 1 Kings 11. We see through here that Solomon turns from the Lord. And even though he had these international relationships, they transformed Israel into basically a metropolis, you could say. They're really prosperous. Ultimately, Solomon became a study in contrast. On the one hand, he built a great temple for the glory of the Lord. On the other hand, he pursued the pleasures of the world. And yet, Solomon's accomplishments and experiences also enabled him to pass on great wisdom about life. And they're great lessons for us as well as we study the Bible and we see how easy it is to veer from the truth. And that's why in Ecclesiastes 12, 1 through 8, he tells us about the vanities, about remembering the Creator in the days of our youth, uh, after hearing many other things about, where he was going and how he was falling away. So it's important to take a moment to learn a lesson from King Solomon in his life. Through Solomon, we learn that life is temporal. A person might have access to everything this world can offer, but in the end, everything outside a relationship with God is vanity. And we see through all the history, we're looking at this, big advancements are made in many countries and even in Israel where they followed Yahweh. But it's vanity to have a relationship outside of God. And if you're in a relationship, it's vanity to not have that relationship to be focused on Christ together. So those who seek meaning and power, possessions, pleasure, and riches will ultimately come up empty in the end. So we see that the kingdom gets divided and a time of war comes. It appears that Solomon's international alliances and many building projects created strong tensions in Israel that eventually led to division of the nation. And we also see Christ says that, a nation divided cannot stand. And we see what it took for Solomon to build all these magnificent things, and that he had so many people help in the work with this. He had so much respect, uh, you know, but he had these 12 districts formed and had to maintain the support of Solomon's administration and royal court, which included the king's hundreds of wives. It's easy to see that this must have been a very heavy burden for a nation to bear. There is no doubt that even in Solomon's time, cracks were beginning to show spiritually, and eventually it would lead to the division of it. After Solomon died, his son Rehoboam took the throne. The northern tribes of Israel demanded that he lighten the burdens that were required to bear the government. And Rehoboam foolishly refused and threatened even greater burdens. And about the same time, the nation of Egypt was briefly reunified, as we've talked about through some of these history lessons. And this put in a new pharaoh who recaptured the lost territories. He even advanced on Jerusalem and attacked the city. As we actually know from 1 Kings 14, we hear about this attack that the new Pharaoh had put on Egypt. And also at this time, the Assyrians, under King Ashur-dan II, were finally able to push back the Armenians and reestablish their power and reviving their country. This even brought Assyria out of the Dark Ages and into what historians call the Assyrian Renaissance age. So, several generations later, Shalmaneser III became king of Assyria. He continued to solidify his strength in the region and began to advance toward the northern kingdom of Israel, where Ahab was king of Israel during this time, and he sought to strengthen the nation by developing an alliance with the Phoenician king of the city of Sidon. Apparently, in order to seal the alliance, Ahab married the king's daughter, Jezebel. We know about the dark time that this brought. Jezebel's wickedness had become very well known, even though she's not the most wickedest queen mentioned in the Bible, but she is definitely a very evil and wicked lady. few people realize that her committing to Israel, and hence the trouble that followed, was a direct result of Ahab's failures to trust and obey God, which happens to any body and nation that refuses to have trust in the Lord. We see that things will go south. So when Ahab married Jezebel, he rejected God and began to worship Baal. And this is where Baal worshiping took a very huge stronghold in Israel at this time and caused lots of trouble for this nation. Despite Ahab's attempts to present a formidable front against the Armenians, the king of Damascus gathered 32 Armenian warlords and mounted an attack that we hear of in 1 Kings 20. And despite the enormous combined force arrayed against Israel, God protected his people, and the battle fought to a draw. And this is where we see, how God continues to show grace, even though a country or a people might continuously rebel. All right, so we're going to take a brief pause from Israel and now go back to Greece, and we'll speak about some things. We're going to speak about Greece in another video in the future, but at the time frames of where we were talking about with Israel, is very important to realize there was very important sacred history taking place. And we have to see what's taking place at this point. Greece was not a unified country. They were divided into city states. These city states often battled each other, and many had different forms of government. Like the city state of Sparta, for example, was ruled by a dual kingship, because they believed that these two men that were kings, that they were descendants of Hercules, the mythic Greek hero and son of Zeus. So they had equal authority and they couldn't veto one another. Many other Greek city states were ruled by their traditional aristocratic government of small elite rulers, with commoners having little or no power. Some years later in Greek history, another form of government called democracy emerged in Athens, and we'll talk about this in a foreseeable future. But this was people ruled by either by directly voting on an issue or electing someone that could operate on their behalf. And by early 700 BC, the Greek city of Olympia was growing in size, and they had this worship of Hera and Zeus that were drawing people from all over Greece, and it was planting some seeds of unity uh, at this time as well. But a little further north of Olympia, another temple was built in the city of Delphi. And this temple, they would have an oracle that was sought out from a priest or a priestess. And we see that individuals and governmental leaders, there was a little seeds planted of unity in this place as well. They would come here and pose questions of every kind of problem, of personal and political, where a high priestess would actually bring these prophecies out to him. And the Greeks believed that this high priestess was a spokeswoman from the sun god Apollo, and would in turn communicate the will of his father Zeus through this priestess. As the voice of Apollo and Zeus, this priestess could set government policies, cause cities to be built and colonies to be established, and to begin or end wars. And it's also around this time, according to tradition, that the famous Olympic Games were first introduced. And we see that the Olympics had came about. So the king's hope was that these Olympic Games would bring an end to many of the conflicts between the Greek city-states. These games were to be held every 4 years, and it was to bring a truce. The truce was eventually extended to 3 months to allow safe passage for any participant. The games never brought about peace that this king had hoped for, but during the time there was great unity during the games. And seeds of unity planted during this time would not bear their fruit until the rise of Alexander the Great. And through Alexander, Greece would emerge as a world empire that God used to advance both sacred and redemptive history. And we also, if you've ever read the book of Maccabees, Alexander the Great is mentioned in the book of Maccabees. So, to end this little quick portion, one of the great things about studying history is the opportunity that we see where movements of the world from different perspectives. History is such an important thing, and God is the God of all history. His hand is always moving and shaping things. Even in the book of Esther, we don't see God's name mentioned, but we know God is working through Esther and Mordecai, for instance, and even through Alexander the Great, because some things came about. We think fast forward into the future. If Rome wouldn't have had the rule they had in Israel, one, we wouldn't be seeing people like Cornelius be saved by the Lord Jesus Christ, because they wouldn't have been involved with things went on in Israel. They wouldn't have heard the word of the Lord at that time. Of course, the Lord would have had all this taken place, but we see from what China did, what Greece did, from David to Solomon, we see throughout history, God has been moving and continues to move. May God bless you all, and much love.